I have some additional details on the Gengar Day event. Originally, we thought Gengar Day was only going to have Psychic as a special move for Gengar. Well, we got some new updates, many of you are probably already aware, but Lick will be another move that Gengar will get specially for Gengar Day. If you're not familiar with Gengar Day at all, it's happening on November 3rd. Gengar is going to be a special raid boss, sort of like how the legendary birds had it, for a one-day event, 3-hour period. Link in the description for time zone information, because I'm not the master of time here, right? But yeah, so special day for Gengar, and you can maybe catch a shiny, right? So that's pretty exciting. And initially, Niantic was like, yeah, super special, awesome, and it can know Psychic. And like crickets were chirping, right? Like, okay, Psychic, whatever. But then they came out and said, oh, by the way, it can also know Lick now. And then everybody got hyped. So a lot of people are asking now, well, what's better, Lick or Shadow Claw? I'll give you a special little TLDR. They're basically the same. A lot of us don't have the option to choose between one or the other. So for the non-Shadow Claw having population, Lick will be the strictly better option for them. But if you have both, there's reasons to use either of them. Before I get into details on Lick versus Shadow Claw though, I want to take you through some of the basics of the Tier 4 Gengar Raid fight. Overall, you don't need to know too much beyond like, Mewtwo, Tyranitar, Gengar, and Metagross for this fight, but if you're up against Focus Blast, well then you probably won't want to use Tyranitar. And if you're up against Shadow Ball, well you probably won't want to use Gengar. Right? So because those two moves are so polarizing, I made a graph on each of them. We're going to start out with the Shadow Ball one. So here's a graph of the Tier 4 Gengar Raid fight using Sucker Punch and Shadow Ball. This is using level 40 counters with no dodging and Ultra Friendship. Now some Pokemon do experience special breakpoints for best friendship. I have a link in the description to the breakpoint calculator if you want to investigate those on your own. Many people are wondering, can I solo a Tier 4 Gengar? And I'll tell you right now, no you can't. Tier 4 raid bosses all have 7,500 hit points, and you have 180 seconds to complete the raid, which means you need a collective of 42 damage per second in order to take down the raid boss in time. And looking at this graph, the greatest counter doesn't even pass 30, so you have to duo it. In order to duo it, you need half of 42, so that brings you to 21 DPS, and if you want to be on the safe side, I'd say look at counters that are above 22 DPS. So anything above this 22 line here should service you well for a duo, and if you're going for a trio or anything greater than 2, it's going to be a really easy time, so no use worrying for that too much. One thing you'll notice right away down here is that Shadow Claw is outpacing Lick on average. Shadow Claw being slightly better than Lick, right? But then if you look up here, you'll see that Lick P1 is doing way better than both of them. Yeah, so P1 is the lead position. So when you start the raid fight, the very first Pokemon you put in, if it is a Lick or Hex Gengar, you will see an increased performance for these Gengars. And the reason why is because Lick and Hex are high energy per second moves. And because of the circumstances of the very beginning of the fight, you will most consistently be getting off an extra Shadow Ball that the lower EPS moves, such as Shadow Claw and Sucker Punch, won't be experiencing, making them just crazy better overall in that one particular situation. So that is something to be mindful of if you don't have, a pocket full of Mewtwo's and Tyranitars to just smash this raid with. If you do have a Hex, or maybe you pimped out a Lick Gengar right away, then you may want to consider using that in the lead slot if you know you're up against Shadow Ball. Now one thing that's kind of interesting in the simulations for this fight is Psychic kept coming up, being consistently better than Shadow Ball for the Shadow Ball raid, which is kind of peculiar. Overall, for all the other raid scenarios, Shadow Ball is going to be much better on Mewtwo, and you can see that they are pretty neck and neck at the end here for Mewtwo. So overall, I'd say siding with Shadow Ball on your Mewtwo would probably be the better option if you have the option to use Shadow Ball. If you missed out on Shadow Ball Mewtwo, Psychic is quite serviceable, and as you can see in this particular scenario, is actually better than Shadow Ball, so good news there. But yeah, aside from these fancy high DPS options, we always have old reliable here, Bite Crunch Tyranitar, kind of leading the charge, being one of the greatest options for this fight overall. This is 38.5 star, meaning that the breakpoint is at level 39. I just wanted to highlight the performance of Tyranitar before meeting that breakpoint, since level 39 is basically level 40. This suggests that from level 27.5 to level 38.5 or even higher, you will see basically linear gains for your Tyranitar in performance rather than just a random spike in performance from hitting a breakpoint. And yeah, you can see the other good counters for this fight. You can pick and choose as much as you want, and if you are shooting for the duo, just make sure you're above that 22 line and you should be fine. And if you're raiding with more than 5 people, I'm pretty sure you're going to be fine no matter what. As long as people are actually tapping their screens, even Agrons. You know what, I probably shouldn't talk about Aggron. Tyranitar's looking pretty hot here, but what about the Focus Blast fight? So here we have again, Tier 4 Gengar, which means that you'll want to have above basically 22 DPS for the duo, but instead of Sucker Punch Shadow Ball, we are now using Hex with Focus Blast. So you can see in this fight, Tyranitar not doing so hot. It is still at the 22 line at level 40, which is quite impressive, but overall not as tanky as the other counters. If you're not familiar with my graphs, probably should have explained this earlier, but the x-axis is total damage output, which is basically a more useful metric for tankiness. The y-axis is damage per second, so the taller you are, the higher damage you're dealing is, and the further to the right you are, the more survivable you are, basically. And yeah, you can see here Shadow Ball Mewtwo is blowing Psychic Mewtwo out of the water, as expected, so really good there. And Gengar has a whole bunch of resistances to Focus Blast, making it one of the better counters for this fight as well. Now, unlike the other scenario that we were experiencing, there is no best in lead situation for Gengar going on. The average performance of Gengar in any position in the raid is going to be the same as any other one. So the lead isn't giving you any weird niche advantage against Focus Blast. And overall, Lick is outperforming Shadow Claw in this particular raid matchup at level 40. So, but it's ever so slight. It's maybe not even a half DPS. So if you are rolling with Shadow Claw, you don't have to feel like you're left too far behind against the Lick, because in practice, you're probably not going to notice that big of a difference between the two moves. Alakazam debuts here as a pretty good glass counter kind of option, so pretty nice. And you'll see that Metagross is holding the fort down. Now in the previous graph, Metagross wasn't doing as hot because Metagross is a Psychic Pokemon, weak to Ghost type damage. Focus Blast, Metagross is neutral. So Metagross, very good option, holding on the fort here. And you'll see that Gardevoir is also doing quite good here as well. Gardevoir is Fairy and Psychic, so getting a doubled up resistance to Focus Blast. However, outside of Focus Blast, you have Shadow Ball, which Gardevoir is weak to, and you got Sludge Bomb, which Gardevoir is weak to. So overall, I don't think Gardevoir is a top option for this fight, but if you know you're up against Focus Blast, very respectable. Another thing, dialing it back to Metagross, Metagross has an immunity to resistance, so a doubled up resistance to poison type damage. So if you're up against a Sludge Bomb, Metagross will service you quite well there as well. So Metagross, very heavy option if you're not up against Shadow Ball. If you are up against Shadow Ball, well, that's what Tyranitar is here for. Focus Blast, Tyranitar is not going to help you out too much. So this covers the general options for the Gengar raid. Not a whole lot to know beyond, Mewtwo, Gengar, Metagross, and Tyranitar, all very great options. You might have to be a little bit mindful of the moveset, but I think overall, as long as you're traveling with more than 3 or 4 people, raid per raid, you should be fine clearing all of these battles. So now that I got the basics of the raid down, you're ready to beat down the Gengar, let's find out what the true difference is between Lick and Shadow Claw is. Which one is better? You can see that Shadow Claw is a higher DPS Ghost type fast move. It's got 12.86 baseline DPS. Lick, on the other hand, is the second highest DPS Ghost type fast move, having 10 DPS. So you can see here that Shadow Claw is a clear winner in damage per second. Now when it comes to the energy gains though, Shadow Claw is actually the loser, 8.57 energy per second, where Lick on the other hand is doing quite well with 12 energy per second. What this means is that overall, all things being equal in the fight, Shadow Claw will be a better fast move than Lick. However, if the extra energy per second from Lick results in you getting an extra Shadow Ball off that you wouldn't get off with Shadow Claw, well then Lick will be much better than Shadow Claw. Now, most of the time, this happening isn't very clear. So then we get like, hundreds, maybe even thousands of simulation results, and we average them, and then we see which one's performing better over all these different, results. But some raid scenarios are a little bit more clear cut. One such example of it being very clear cut is against this Shadow Ball Gengar raid. In the lead slot position, where the fight is most predictable because everyone's starting out baseline 0, Lick and Hex even, because of their higher energy per second, are able to result in an extra Shadow Ball that Shadow Claw can't obtain on average. And they're obtaining it so much that the gap between their performance is just, astronomical. So there will be raid scenarios where Lick just completely blows Shadow Claw out of the water. But overall, in most raid scenarios, Shadow Claw should be ever so slightly better than Lick. At the end of the day, it's the kind of situation where which one is better is only better when it's better. And when it's better or not isn't always 100% clear. But because we have these simulators, we can determine for each individual matchup which one is better. And when we get new raids and stuff like that, you can always trust me to point out and highlight these niche advantages to you. I think overall, the option between Shadow Claw and Lick won't even have to be thought about. A lot of people don't have Shadow Claw, so Lick is going to be the strictly better than everything else option all the time. But if you are someone that does have a bunch of Shadow Claw Gengars all powered up, don't worry, Lick isn't completely trivialized right now. There are still a lot of raid scenarios where Shadow Claw will be better than Lick. One such example is the Giratina raid. I went over the simulations, I didn't graph them out for you, but more often than not, Shadow Claw Gengar is still much better than Lick. So not that big of a deal. Your Shadow Claw Gengar's still good. Lick, though, does have some niche advantages. So to help illustrate this further, I do have this damage over time graph. So what we have going on here is Shadow Claw, the blue line, and Lick, the red lines, damage over time. So this is a Shadow Claw Gengar and a Lick Gengar against a Hex Focus Blast Gengar raid using Ultra Friendship without dodging. And each big spike that you see on this graph is a Shadow Ball usage. So you can see that overall throughout the fight, Shadow Claw is having an advantage over Lick because of its higher baseline DPS. But in each situation where Lick is getting a Shadow Ball off before Shadow Claw does, it does have the advantage over Shadow Claw in DPS. Early on, the spikes are pretty similar because they're both getting energy acceleration from getting hit by the enemy Gengar, but later on in the fight, when the hits from the enemy Gengar are a little bit less consistent, you can see that the Lick is able to get off the Shadow Ball much sooner. This suggests that at any point in time, if Lick does have this advantage over Shadow Claw, Gengar faints, well then Lick will be the victor. But you can see that more often than not throughout this graph, Shadow Claw is having the advantage. At the end of the day, all that matters for your average DPS is what happened when you fainted, and we can see here that Lick did get an extra Shadow Ball off that Shadow Claw wasn't able to get off in time, giving it a DPS spike over Shadow Claw, making it overall better. I know this graph is a little bit convoluted, but I just want to highlight what the true difference was, and the true difference is getting off that extra Shadow Ball. So that's all I've got for the special Gengar Day event for you guys, letting you guys know what the better counters are. Overall, countering the Gengar raids isn't going to be that difficult. You don't need to know a whole lot beyond like Mewtwo, Tyranitar, Gengar, and Metagross, but if you are lacking any of those better counters, well, the graphs do supply you with a variety of options that you can use. And if you're still scratching your head, you can always use Pokebattler or Go Battle Sim, and those simulators do a pretty good job of spelling it out for you as well. As far as the whole Shadow Claw versus Lick debate, I hope I did a good job of explaining that to you. It is a little convoluted, but at the end of the day, all you really have to know is that in practice, overall, they're going to look quite similar. In general, Shadow Claw is going to be better than Lick, but there will be scenarios where Lick is way better than Shadow Claw because of the extra Shadow Ball. If you guys got any questions on this content, comment below, let me know, and I'll be happy to help you out. And if you enjoyed this content and you want to see more like it, well then subscribe to SwagTips. SwagTips. One question you guys might have on the special Gengar Day event is if you'll be able to TM or evolve into Lick. And right now, I can say with a pretty big degree of certainty that you won't be able to TM Lick onto your Gengars. However, you may be able to evolve your Haunters into Gengars that have Lick. My thought is that it's going to function sort of like a Community Day event. However, it's more specific to raids. But because it is Community Day in like nature, you should be able to evolve your Haunters into Lick having Gengars. But I don't know that for a fact, so don't take my word super for it. But it could be mindful to get some Haunters at the ready just in case.